Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Soul Focused Radio. This is your host, Martin Friedman. I'm going solo today, and I'm so excited for the conversation that we're about to have. And I want to let you all know that we're sort of not interrupting, but we're kind of like weaving our way into the new mind conversations, which is going to continue. But we had an opportunity to have a very, very powerful discussion on restorative justice, which actually, if we really wanted to talk about it, actually does align with the new mind, because we are talking about a spiritual process of restoration, not just a physical process of restoration. So I'm not going to hold you all any longer because I'm so excited about this conversation. So here we go with the conversation on perspectives in restorative justice with Jerry Elster and Anuar Velazquez. Let's go. All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining me, Anuar and Jerry. Excited for you all to be here. Jerry, let's jump in with you because our listeners know Anuar pretty well. He's been on a lot of our episodes. So if you could just sort of introduce yourself and why you're here and what your relationship is to restorative justice, that would be awesome.
My relationship and why I'm here probably is one of the same reasons. I think that restorative justice for me is my relationship with restorative justice. It's about healing and maintaining, sustaining relationships, right? And what brought me here was I went through the criminal justice system, and I didn't have, and still don't have, too much love or trust for the current justice system here in America. I viewed the criminal justice system as like, one and the same, an enemy to me and my people and my community. I think it was set for our demise, right? So I was out there like most youngsters. I wasn't no revolutionary soldier or nothing. I was out there acting a fool, right? Trying to answer that question for myself and, feel my buddy, how do we become lucrative, financially empower ourselves within a community and a society that we had seemed to have been cast out of, no investment. Going upon the system, which took me to prison, messing with the street organization, gangs, whatever you want to call them, seeing each other as enemies. I ended up in the system. I did almost 27 years, close to 27 years in prison on a life sentence for slaying one of my gang rivals. And I still saw the system was the enemy. Not only was the system, but those who were, anything that was outside of me was the problem. Until one day I was introduced to this thing called restorative justice, right? So see, you had a system that from birth, I was the enemy. From birth, I was cast out. From birth, I was cut off of any type of investment within that community or civic engagement and rights. So it was easy for me to point a finger and not really take too much accountability. Then I met this thing called restorative justice inside San Quentin State Prison one day. I was looking for it, but not to say I wasn't looking for a change. I was, because that pointing my finger at everybody and excusing myself from any accountability or I found that to be disempowering, and I didn't like that. So I was introduced to this thing called restorative justice, which looked at the criminal justice system, or not just criminal justice offenses, totally different from how the criminal justice system looked at it. See, I never had to look at my victim after the crime and be accountable. I never had to look at society and be accountable. All I had to do was face the same monster that I've been hating anyway, was the system, the criminal justice system, judges, lawyers, and all this whole apparatus that, seemed to be all out to attack me. They had a dude in Oakland, I'm trying to think of this little rapper, he used to say, Too Short. He say, he used all these acronyms. He said, OPD and all these other things just for me. And that's how I felt about the system. You had all these apparatus put in place just for me, right? I wasn't looking at my accountability. Restorative justice taught me how to look within myself for my solutions, because those things without had already shown me that they were not going to be the answer didn't line up, nor did they want the answer to be, shall I say, pleasant for me, right? So I started looking within myself and things I can change. And restorative justice took the picture off of everybody else for my accountability. How do I contribute to society? How do I show up? by doing that, I had to answer some vital questions. Like this guy who I just introduced myself as my rival. When I introduced myself, I talked about this rival who I slain. This wasn't a rival. This was another African-American child, probably grew up in the same conditions I grew up in, right? Having a sandwich, wishing something, 2 pieces of bread, wishing he had something in between, right? Who I saw as the enemy. And because of my lack of accountability and just carrying myself the way I was carrying myself, I learned a lot of things. I learned that most of the stuff that did happen to me, in spite of all those things that were set in place before I was even born that were supposed to be against me, in spite of all that, most of the stuff I bit into because of that bitter pill that society set out there for me, I had to take accountability for that. And when I looked at it, it was me who supposed to squeeze that trigger. It was me who controlled those streets. It was me who did what I did, irregardless, or should I say regardless of some of the stimulants that they put out there, to entrap me within that system. And I saw that as power because now I can take it back. I can stop squeezing that trigger. I can put the gun down. I can stop seeing my fellow brother as my enemy. I can stop looking at all those things that could have catapulted me forward. I can start looking at those things. How do I use those to make the world a better place? And that's what restorative justice was. To me, it's about relationships. And when I did what I did, I broke a serious relationship with another whole part of my community. That dude had mother, father, sisters, brothers. He come from a community which we split these little lines, but our communities are one, right? And so how do I reestablish relationships? Not only I, but how do I make that another brother don't come along, whether it be Latino, Anglo, Asian? How do I put some up to help them to understand that in spite of all those things they put up against us, we can still be in power if we just come together and mend relationships, build, maintain, and establish relationships. That's where I see restorative justice. And I'm not going to go into the deep indigenous roots of it, but that's I'm gonna leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Jerry. That was really powerful. There's a lot to dig in there. Thank you for everything that you shared. And we'll dig in. If not on this episode, we'll dig into the indigenous roots another time for sure. But we want to come to a greater understanding of that as well. Anwar, how about for you? Just reintroduce yourself to our listeners and your relationship to restorative justice and what it means to you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Brother Jerry. Nice to meet you virtually. I hope I have the chance to meet you in person at some point. To those listeners that are new or that are coming back to our podcast to tune in, Anuar Velazquez from the Midwest, first generation immigrant. A little bit about myself. I was a police officer for a long time in Indiana, 10 years. Prior to that, I grew up in impoverished areas, and I think that's what helped me mold that idea of going into law enforcement. I wanted to really change the image of a police officer and moving away from just a law enforcer to a peace officer, right? So when I hear Jerry talk about those relationships that need to be built, throughout the time that I was a police officer, my staple or my foundation was really building relationships. It was going into the communities and getting to know the people that live there, and seeing how it could bring the peace in, right? I think that's also part of what restorative justice is creating those relationships with healing the trauma and healing it from that root and creating peace out of it. But so then after that, I just switched into a different role. I went back to school, got my master's in education, became a school counselor at the high school level, and recently just started my PhD in urban education. So overall, I have a lot of passion for relationships. I have a lot of passion for connection. For me, I think that's what's going to move this social justice movement forward. It's really restoring those relationships that have been broken for so long, that didn't fully start in that place. They were created to be, through racism, they were created to be that breaking apart of relationships for one another. And we talk about this in the Soul Focus rubric, right? And we talk about the purpose of racism was to break all of us apart. So that's just a little bit about me. And I love what I got to hear from Jerry, because so often we hear in this movement, right, the moving away from your own accountability, and that is a place of this empowerment. So we do talk about too, it to regain your empowerment or to empower yourself is to take accountability for your own right, to clean your own side of the street before you try to go to the other side and try to kill or clean somebody else's. But yeah, it's just a little bit about me, and I'm excited to see where this conversation flows and what we're all able to gain from this listening experience too.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Thank you, Anwar. There's a lot to jump in. We're definitely going to have part 2, maybe part 3 on this. I already know. But I'll just kind of reintroduce myself. Obviously, our listeners know me well. I've been doing this podcast for several years now. We have over 100 episodes. I've talked a little bit about this before, but not a whole lot. But my relationship to restorative justice started when I first went up to the prisons. Really, it actually started before then when, I was a teenager and I was running pretty wild, but I was doing it as a middle-class, white Jewish suburban youth. And I definitely was running wild, starting to use drugs and sell drugs at 12, 13, 14 years old. And that continued up until I was in my early 20s, or actually like late teens. So when I first went up to the prison in Washington State Reformatory at Monroe Correctional Complex, the first time I went up there, one of the things that struck me the most was I did a standard, introduction that I did at anti-racist workshops, and like dudes grilled me for like 20 or 30 minutes, about just my standard introduction about, what it meant when I talked about reclaiming humanity as a white person. And that just really struck me because I realized, oh, this is not going to be like your standard, workshop for me where I could be almost performing, but I was being asked to be extremely real. And so when both of you talked about accountability and relationships, what I realized was if I was going to go up to the prisons, basically I couldn't BS. I was going to have to be extremely real. And everything I said was going to get challenged, which like bothered me a little bit, but actually it was sort of a gift. It was an amazing gift. The other thing that really struck me is that I was sitting next to men who were very, very similar to me, similar in age, similar in build, had done similar things as me as a teenager, but they did it as, mostly Black men, because it was Black Prisoners Caucus that brought us up. It was mostly Black men who had done it in the city in circumstances much more like you, Jerry. And, just like me, they sold drugs, but here they are, serving double-digit sentences, some with life without, because of the context. And so what struck me so much was how the context of my life impacted the fact that I was coming up as a volunteer, and really people couldn't meet without me or someone like me coming up. And so that's where it really got to me. And it's one of the reasons why I committed. I ended up going up there for more than 15 years, pretty much, twice a month on average for all that time. And it was about relationships, and the idea of restoration for me, similar to you all, is I had to look deep inside myself. I had to look past a lot of guilt and shame and other feelings to really, people that otherwise would not have been humanized to me became humanized to me. And so there was a lot of accountable relationships that were developed from that process. So that, to me, just like you all, that's the root of the restoration. And then later on, I got involved in more traditional, or I'll say traditional, but named, programs named restorative justice and part of circles and stuff like that. But yeah, so I just, I think what's exciting about this conversation is that all three of us have relationship to this subject, but from very different perspectives. So Jerry, I want to jump back to you. And first of all, I think before I ask you any specific questions, just any thoughts you have after listening to Anwar and myself give our stories around this and our backgrounds.
I think that I'm always, and I don't know why, I'm still amazed by the common thread that when you meet people, and I know what it is now, it's called humanity, right? The common thread, I'm talking about, I don't care which background you come from. It seems like when restorative justice, I just feel that global connection, and I'm listening to you two speak and tell your stories, and I think about that global connection. It's like, think about when you strip away all the professional George, and the titles, the labels, and all that other stuff, and you talk about where we really came from, almost like from infancy up until a certain point. It's like we're robbed of our humanity through, was it networks or this whole miraculous, or just socialized the way we socialize here in the West, right, in the United States. Seems like in a way we kind of like, to exist, we almost had to give up our innocence in a way. You talked earlier, you said on why I first talked about coming up in the community. Think about before the uniform, before the labels or titles, right? We were trying to find a way out here in this society, and we were innocent. We were really, really thriving. Suppose it was something like restorative justice or these indigenous concepts that instead of trying to squash that creativity, squash that vulnerability, because even though it was wild, it was a vulnerable part of it, found a way to plug in to enhance it, to bring us together. And it seemed like we had to go in this complete circle to come back to where we started at. And I'm listening to your story. I mean, I said that you said you started going into the prisons. Well, even before that, you said up until young adulthood, you corrected and said, well, maybe at about 18 or 19, I think you said. You too were on a trajectory, a course of almost of discovery, whether you were sampling drugs or just the whole atmosphere thing. Suppose we had an apparatus in place or a system in it. Well, I don't even want to call it a system, something in place to take you to that next level, right? To take each one of us to that next level. And it was something that was restored or had some type of indigenous roots in it to help to guide us, to help us to be invested in this society. That's why I started with Saul said, I feel like they, in a way, they kind of stole our innocence, and we had to all give it up to be a part of a society that's like not so cool.
And yeah, Martin, if I can jump in real quick, as I hear you talk about that, the first thing that popped into my mind is absolutely, we were socialized to see ourselves and we talk about it in the Soul Focus group, right? We're socialized to view and to treat each other through the lens of being in a box, right? Being put in a box, whether it's titles, whether it's the position that you hold, the area that you live, the materialistic stuff that you own. But when you look at it through the lens of like at a park, right? When you see children playing, that's where the innocence comes from. But then on the outside, on the outskirts of it, the parents are over here talking about the titles, the what they have, where they come from, what school the kid goes to. So yeah, I think a lot of it is really going back to that place of seeing each other through the lens of humanity, through the innocence and vulnerable lens. That's what's connecting. Not so much of I'm Mr. So-and-so, and this is what I do around here. I don't really care so much about that. I mean, who are you? And I think that's what restorative justice also does, is it takes you back to that place of who are you, that question of who you are. And I think so often we miss that question, and instead we ask ourselves, or we tell other people what it is that we do.
Yeah, thank you both. I love the idea of going past, of reconnecting with our humanity and going past titles. And when I think of titles, I'm also thinking of just all of our identities, our racial identities, gender identities, all of that stuff, because all of that stuff is added on to us as humans from, externally. You both used the word accountability when you did your introductions. And I would love, because I think there's a lot of different definitions of accountability out there. I would love to hear from each of you, like, what is your definition of accountability? When you use that word and you talk about how it connects to restorative justice, what does accountability mean to you? Whoever wants to go first, go first.
Accountability to me is everything, right? It's who I am. It's my essence. It's my authentic self, right? It's not this thing that was created outside of me. Accountability is looking back at those times I was talking about and asking myself, right? First of all, not just where I came from, who I was at that time and why I chose to give up who I was. What were these things that came? And really answering those being honest with myself. It's almost like when you think about, I think it's the 4th step in AA, and being honest with yourself. It's hard. It's not an easy step. I mean, it's like looking at some of your vulnerable moments that you don't want nobody else to know about and being honest about it, right? My accountability started first in the home. Started thinking about the stuff, how other people showed up in my home, mother, father, how rules were established, right? Those dysfunctional rules, see no evil, do no evil, speak, those secrets and stuff. Again, I saw that was just a picture, right? That was just the chip of it. That was just a picture of who I became in open society, because those same things that went on in the home, that was like a small, on a macro level, what was happening in our communities, right? Don't talk, don't see, don't speak. That biggest one is snitch. Snitches get stitches, right? Don't tell, don't just, but here it is in the same community. If somebody breaking my house, I want somebody to say something. If my system was violated, I want somebody, I may not call the police, I have other ways of dealing with it, but it's the same type of contradictions and stuff. So accountability is reaching within those reaching in those contradictions and being honest about it, right? Did somebody actually make me do this? No. Why did I choose? So I mean, without that, being vulnerable, without that search and being honest with yourself, you're gonna just be creating or recreating the same system that we talk about, we complaining about, right? And so accountability is being as vulnerable as possible, doing that fearless search of yourself. Because believe it or not, on the other end, it may start off looking ugly and horrible. To take a person's life, I think is one of the worst things you can do in this society, because you took somebody off this earth, right? And that's a hard thing to really come to terms with, because we want to blame everything else. And maybe some other factors came into it, and then maybe they didn't. Maybe it was something that started where I started when in that home. Some pains that weren't dealt with, some wounds that weren't healed, and that I felt encroached upon, where I had felt that I need to defend my manlyhood, right? Why? Let's be accountable. Let's go search. Let's go deep within. Learn what it is that you brought into this thing that's set aside for what was implemented. Like I talked about the racial, and what you talked about, Martin, those racial things, right? Those disparities that were set in place that we have no control over. I don't like to say this, but I say it often because I believe it. I believe that 85% of the things that I've done were me, and 25% was them other things that I allowed to guide and scope me into being this person that when I looked in the mirror, I couldn't even look at without blinking, because I didn't like what I was looking back at. Accountability is being able, when you reach that point, we'll be able to look in the mirror and say, I'm proud of the person that's sitting in front of me. You know what, I know this little goofy commercial where you say, I like me. I like, I'm better, I'm greater. Accountability is being able to look in the mirror and say, I am worthy. I am a human being. I like me today. That's accountability. It's everything I do and accept what you've done. And the last part of accountability to me is making a pinch. It's like when Tookie talked about Blu-rays, Black redemption. It's about redemption. What are you going to do about it now that you know it?
Real quick, Anwar, before you go, Jerry, I want to dive a little deeper into that 85%, right? That's looking back, right? That's looking back and realizing that that 85% was you had choices. Maybe, but I want to be clear. In the moment, you didn't feel a lot of choice, right? You felt this sort of inevitability, but as you look back, you saw that you actually, despite all the circumstances in your life, you actually did have choices. But I just want to be clear. Did you feel that in the moment? Or in the moment, did you feel like this was all like a wave just kind of sweeping you off to sea? And now when you look back on it, you're like, oh, I could have made a lot of different choices. And that's, but that's a growth process for you, right?
I would say both. Of the 85%, we go to breaking it down into a pie, probably a percentage of it was hindsight. I know we all wish we had hindsight, right? Don't go that way, go this way, right? But then you really look at it in the African-American community, my mother didn't send me to school to gang bang. The teachers the ones that were good ones, didn't say, Jerry, don't come to my class, ditch, right? So that's when I talk about the 85%, I'm talking about more in a open sense. Like there were things that I could do. I mean, I could tell people that I was a Boy Scout till I was like 16, straddling the fence, right? How many people came along and told me, Jerry? So I knew, and I don't hold everybody accountable like I do myself, right? Because I think that what I did learn in prison was there is a certain element that we're so lost because of psychological, and this is why I went to psychology myself, that we're so lost that they really didn't know right from wrong. I cannot take that. I can excuse myself. I knew, right? I was an explorer scout. I had people that kept trying to show me along the way, and I chose. So that's why I say, personally for me, it was, I went into it eyes wide open. It wasn't drugs. I don't get high, I don't drink. I was that gangbanger in the car that's gonna shoot you because I really felt you were my enemy, right? I really felt that. And I bought into the foolishness because I felt that I was not a part of that society, and I was gonna create a society, or be part of a society that was gonna be for me. So there was a whole lot of things in place where I say, yeah, I did know. And I spit on it. I didn't want it, right? I didn't want it. And I didn't want it because it wasn't wrapped up. It was fake. People telling me and talking. I mean, I don't like to get on the religious and political thing, but when you even talk about religion, you go to church on Sundays and 7 days a week, you raising hell, right? I didn't want it. It was fake. Turn the other cheek. But at the same time, cops is gunning our folks down in the streets. I didn't want that fake shit. And so, yeah, I chose. But if there was other choice, and the other choice for me was, don't become the fake shit, right? Because in reality, think about it. The more police we put on the street, I mean, the more, it's like supply and demand. The more crime I'm committing, the more I'm asking for more law enforcement. These same people to stop what they Gestapo type tactics into my community. So those are the parts I didn't know about. I didn't know I was contributing like that.
Thank you for that, Jerry. I think, when you ask the question of how do I define accountability, there are some similarities to it as well. I think it does take a level of vulnerability, a level of authenticity too. I identify accountability as, being able to, in mind, body, and spirit, even though at times it's painful, being able to take ownership, right? Full ownership, again, in mind, body, and spirit. At times we want to take ownership or we want to be held accountable for the things that we do. And our mind may be telling us, yeah, let's go ahead and take ownership. Let's go ahead and do the right thing, right? Quote unquote. But our soul it's in pain. And I think that vulnerability piece comes in to be able to heal those pieces within us. See, again, as children, we're children, depending on how a child is brought up, they're so quick at saying, hey, I am sorry for this. Yet as adults, depending on how it is that we grow up, again, depending on the trauma, depending on the things that we see and that we face and that we experience, it takes us forever to be able to apologize. And I think that's where that soulful piece needs to come in the sense of vulnerability and healing, to be able to take full accountability again in mind, body, and spirit. And it's also a choice, and it's an action, intentional and consciously. I think at times, we also misinterpret or misidentify accountability as just forgiving, right? But it has to go past beyond that point, because when you talk about restorative justice, part of it too is how are you healing with the victim? How are you also healing and healing with the community overall? That community that you caused any type of harm to. And I think that's where that huge piece has to come in. It has to be that full connecting piece overall. But that's how I identify. And again, there's some similarities to what Brother Jerry was talking about, that vulnerability, because it is vulnerable. It is highly, highly vulnerable to take accountability.
I appreciate what both of you said. That was really powerful. And Jerry, what you said about supply and demand is also really powerful. And it's crazy for me on a certain level that we're talking about 15, 16, 17-year-old kids being responsible when we know their brains aren't even like fully developed, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds that are taking people's lives in a lot of these inner cities right now. And it's hard for me. Like there's a part of me that is like, yes, and we have to take accountability as a society, especially folks like myself who are on the white side of life. Like I said, like it's a whole lot easier for me to take accountability on a personal level because I wasn't faced with the same choices and the same dilemmas that both of you were. A couple things could have gone wrong here and there, and I could have ended up inside, or I could have ended up dead, but it wasn't like on a day-to-day basis. So there's a level of grace that I was given by society, so I didn't have to make some of the really challenging choices that both of you had to make. And then I have some accountability for that. And I define accountability more along the lines of responsibility. I define accountability very similar to what both of you said, in terms of like, it's my responsibility, not just to take on guilt and shame, for me being locked up and me not being locked up, and Jerry, you being locked up, or the guy sitting next to me at Monroe being locked up and me not being locked up. But the accountability was being able to, like you both said, like getting in right alignment with myself and doing everything I could, not just being like an activist or an organizer, but to get right with myself, to be in spiritual, physical, and emotional alignment. And that's still an accountability journey for me. But I learned early on that accountability in a lot of these circles can be weaponized, and that people can use the concept of accountability in an abusive way. Actually, when you're getting accountability from an external source, you're giving control over to that external source. And I was in those types of relationships for a long time. So what you all are saying is so grounded to me, so much more grounded than, a couple decades, 20, 25 years of me misunderstanding what accountability was, where I felt like I had to sacrifice physically, spiritually, and emotionally in order to make up for those societal inequities that I benefited from. Whereas now I understand that it's actually just my responsibility to get as right with myself as possible, and then I'm gonna be able to be of service. I can't be of service if I'm sacrificing myself. So I'm very much in alignment with what both of you said, what accountability is. Yeah, I just want to, any thoughts that you all have, like, we can just open it up a little bit conversationally right now, but anything that's coming up for either of you right now.
On top of what you said, I mean, the only thing I would add to that, for each one of them, whether you be woman, child, man, whatever, human being, right? On the other side of that, I think that accountability, when you reach that level where, okay, I have accepted, at least for my consciousness, my knowledge, because who knows, 10 years from now, some other stuff might come up, right? And I'm like, oh, I forgot, But once you reach that level where okay, and I'm gonna go back with your terminology when you talk about responsibility, Martin, which I think is at the other end of accountability, right? Because you're responsible now, right? You're saying, or you're putting out the sign that I'm responsible. I'm going to be responsible for putting out the right message. I'm going to be more conscious about how I approach certain elements within my community, within my society, how I approach law enforcement and stuff like that. All these things are part of accountability, because we know now, folks are watching, people are learning, especially those who talked about that vulnerable age and stuff, that's impressioning, right? So I have to, with my responsibility, I have to leverage. I can't just keep it to myself. It's almost going back to saying, the more you get, the more you give, the more you get, right? When I give it away, it spreads. You see what I'm saying? When I leverage that power now that I can harness, and I can say no and mean no, and I can say yes in the right time, mean yes, and I can pass this on to young folks and other folks of my same age or elders, right? It's all about now leveraging my privileges. The privileges. I did a workshop one time, and I thought this workshop was going to be just about race and economics. But then gender came into the picture, because the workshop was like 60-40 in favor of women and men in the room. And when we start talking about our personal accountability, nobody once said to these sisters, I owe an apology, or some in my role toward accountability, how I treated my sisters, right? And I was a facilitator. I don't remember if Justin was at that circle. We was anyway, what's this, Philadelphia, at the Quaker House. And women start talking, and it came so strong to me that I'm like, oh man, I didn't even look on that part of accountability. How have I treated my sister, biological and within the community? How do we think about our sisters? How do I leverage the privilege I have to enhance what's going on with them? And this didn't start off like, well, okay, we're going to just go into gender. We start with these Palestinian sisters coming in, being real vulnerable and really telling what they was going through in the community. And when you talk about Palestine, how many people actually think about the young women that's going through the searches and all of, we don't think about that. That was the first time I had to hear that. And I think it was because Dustin was facilitating. I got a chance to really kind of kick me, was co-facilitating, sit back and I listen. And they start talking about the gender role in this. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about this before. How do I show up for mine in my community? Those sisters and stuff like that. So it's all about leveraging the privileges and power. You talk about from race and ethnic part, accountability, being white and stuff like that, but there are other power dynamics that work in place that I have power of too, because, and I just wasn't plugged into it or wasn't acknowledging. So it's just leveraging those, I would say leveraging privileges.
I love that. I do love that because, so often we miss the fact that we all in some way, shape or form, we have a relative advantage, right? Like you said, it took you back a little bit and then you started to question, oh crap, well, how do I leverage it now? I think, going back to something that you said earlier, Martin, is that I think we treat accountability in the wrong way. We treat accountability as a tool against each other instead of with each other. It's at times it can be highly shameful. We use it as a tool of shame and apply it to each other in that way. So again, I think a big part of accountability is healing, that healing from within. Because I can hold myself accountable to something today. And if I'm truly healing, I know that tomorrow or maybe the day after, that thing won't come back again. But I think at times we're asking to forgive ourselves so often, right, that we just keep repeating the thing. So am I truly being accountable to myself, in a way that, again, is not shameful toward others or shameful toward myself for making that mistake, right? Or for committing that action or for committing that crime. I think that's part of what restorative justice can be too, is that transformative and sustainable peace. What is it that we want to see? Do we want to see transformation or do we want to see just a plateau and I'm just stuck in this place?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. That's a powerful question. And as you said earlier, Anuar, we all know that racism, all of it, Jerry, like racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, all of it was designed to separate people that would naturally be together. And in order to separate people externally, you have to separate people from their true and authentic selves, which is why I love that definition that you started with of accountability, which is a return back to our true and authentic self. And the only way we can do that is when we start changing our choices, right? And one of the things that I would love for us to teach all children is that every single choice you make shapes your reality. I mean, Jerry, you know that better than any of us on this call. Anuar, you know it too. All of us do. And I remember, when I would take young people up to the prison sometimes, because I worked with youth in an upward bound program and with a youth employment program. And we would take youth up there, and inevitably the people that would speak to the youth would always talk about choices, right? That every given moment you have that choice. You might feel disrespected. You might feel, all of these things, but the choice that you make will literally shape your reality. And you might make a choice in that moment that feels like, like you're gonna be a punk or you're gonna be a coward or something like that. But in that moment that you make that choice, you completely shape what will happen next. And we don't teach our children that. And I was just thinking about, like, when you talk about restoring, or we've been talking about restoring in this whole conversation, the truth is our children are geniuses, and our children have a better understanding of this than we do. But we, figuratively or literally, like, beat it out of them. Right. And we condition them to not feel like they have choices. That's why I asked you that question, Jerry, because I was thinking, like, a lot of the youth I've worked with and that I've heard people talk about it, they didn't feel like they had a choice. They felt like this wave was kind of sweeping them. And I appreciate you being honest and saying that you actually did have choices, because you were in Boy Scouts up until 16. And so I really I really admire you owning that. And I just wonder what life would be like, what this country would be like if we really spent a lot of time with our children, teaching them that every choice they make shapes their reality, from whether they have that cookie or not, or whatever it is at 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. But you all have moved me to that place about how powerful choices are in terms of shaping our reality.
And not only does it shape our own reality, but also it can completely transform and change someone else's reality too, right? And I think that's
Exactly.
that's what as a nation and as a society, no matter what role you're talking about in any system whatsoever, whether it's in the criminal justice system, whether it's in education, healthcare, we place that accountability and that choice on someone else. I know I made that mistake as a police officer, right? I would constantly go to, no, it's the white officer that needs to change this. It's the white officer that's accountable, and they're the ones that need to make that choice to create this a more equitable system, without realizing again that in a way I was making myself powerless. I was making, and again, not power in the sense of power over, but power within. I was so disempowered that I would look for other people and I would hold them accountable in a way, thinking that in a shameful way, unfortunately, without realizing that I'm over here almost making the same mistakes. So we've gotten to play this really ugly game of hot potato, right? Where we pass it along, blaming it and putting it on somebody else, putting the heat on somebody else, without realizing that at some point I got to touch it. I had the opportunity to touch it.
Yes.
And now I impacted how the game goes, right?
And that's why I talk about choices. Because in each element, in each sector in your life, right, although those choices are limited, it's only a small percentage thing that's going to take something so far. The guys who drove the train to Auschwitz with the Jews, right, I was just doing my job, right? Me and my community. Yeah, I learned well to master that contradiction within society, saying, when you compromise ethical standards, when they're not looking, do what you want to do. Who cares? They can't prove it. We teach our children this, right? We rob, and that's what I talked about, the vulnerability. We rob them of their vulnerability. I totally agree with you. Our children, I think, they're like vessels of man. All this knowledge and wisdom, the natural stuff, but then we strip them of it and we teach them all these contradictions, these social norms. Oh, you don't say that, you don't do this, and after a while they start putting on a charade. So we giving up our power, right? They teach us, yeah, I was a Boy Scout, but at the same time, I was a gang member, right? So I was living two different lives because my mother told me I had to live like this, but when I was in the community, I was told I had to live like this to survive. Then when I was over here with these people, I know I didn't want to fall on that side, because these guys on this side were getting chased and killed by police officers. So I had to slip up under the thing with them, but at the same time, I wanted to be this nice kid still. Feel me? So you had all these contradictions. And it's like choices, the choices were slim where, okay, travel through enemy neighborhood or a neighborhood that was absent of yours. Don't gangbang, get the shit beat out of you. Excuse my language, right? Or you travel with your colors. You join a gang so you can have some support, right? Live out here with these guys and make them think that I'm just a square Boy Scout dude, right? In the community full of drugs, gangbangers, and everything, right? And be this Boy Scout type of dude and get the mess beat out of me. Join the gang and I have to avoid the police, but the police only coming through my community. If on hourly, every other hour, I can avoid them. I know this community. I can't avoid these dudes right here, right? So we forced to make these cold decisions. And I like your analogy about being able to pass the responsibility, where I can say, well, it's not my fault. That was my biggest fault. Because when I do that, I'd have to accept responsibility, accountability for it, right? They made me do this. You moved me in this community. You brought me up in this household with all kind of secrets and all this other foolishness, right? You did this, not me. But there were things. Were they small at the time? Yeah, there were some small choices. I mean, I did have very small choice. Make a choice about getting your teeth knocked out or saying, okay, I'll be with y'all. I'll join the gang, right? There's things, of course there's elements in there to encourage you to continue down that road, and we can keep passing the buck and say, well, they made me do it. They made me do it. Until there's nobody there but you sitting up looking in the mirror in an 8x10 cell or something, talking about, hey, no, you, man, wait, let's get back how you get here. because that's going to be the key to your freedom. That's going to be, and I'm not talking about just, even though the analogy is a prison, I'm not just talking about a physical prison. I'm talking about a psychological, emotional, spiritual prison. When do we stop passing the buck and say, hey, I could have saved that child. I could have just said the right thing. I could have did the right thing. I could have saved her. I could have saved him. I could, I didn't. Because my society taught me to think about me, materialism, and all this other stuff. Just media sensationalization, whatever these influences were, that's what they taught me to be about myself. Forget all that other stuff. You got to survive.
I truly love that, Jerry. I think the way throughout this conversation that, one of the things that I go back to is that connection piece, right? And I think not being able to hold yourself accountable, not being able to realize that you have the choices and that you make the choices, that's what has further disconnected us, right? So I think in a way to shorten that, or to really put that into perspective, is that the more that we focus on the what we are, right? Because the what we are is about evaluation. It's about really evaluating in one another, right? But the who that's what brings us in that place of connection. So the what is more about the action, where the who is about the choice, right? And I think that's that choice. Once we realize that we're making the choice, then we're also realizing that we can also make that connection. Not only the connection within ourselves, but also in the external world. So hearing you say that again, it continues to drive me in that place of holding myself, again, cleaning your side of the street first, holding myself accountable to really going back to finding who I am, because that is how I'm going to be able to connect with people through my own choices and my own accountability.
I want to thank you both so much. I just want to honor your time. Like, this conversation will continue. Can I get a commitment from both of you to come back and do a part 2 and a part 3? Awesome. So if you're just if you're just listening, I got thumbs up and head nods. So yeah, and on part 2, I really want to talk about this choice, that Jerry, that you made when you were incarcerated, the choices that you started to make, how that evolved for you, and Anwar, how the choices that you started to make as an officer, how that started to evolve for you. Because I know enough about your story, Anwar, to know that you started making choices that impacted your ability to stay an officer. And Jerry, I've only met you once prior to this, but I also know enough of your story to know the same thing. I'll just leave us with this. You talked about the driver of the train in the European Holocaust, Jerry, but there's also a very famous psychologist, Viktor Frankl, who writes about, he was in a concentration camp, and he also writes about the choices that he made, and that the people that were in the concentration camp, that they had choices they could make day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, moment to moment, and how that impacted their ability to survive and to ultimately thrive. And so oftentimes we just look at the choices of the oppressor, but also realizing that all of us, and I really heard this clearly in what both of you said, that all of us have choices even inside of like external oppression and really messed up external circumstances. So, man, I love this conversation. I want you both to unmute. I want to thank you both so much for being with us today, and I can't wait for part 2.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Again, I think I need to buy a plane ticket and go out to the West and meet you in person, because I can already tell that the conversation will be even more developing and more connecting. I appreciate your time, and thanks, Martin. I'm looking forward to the next one.
I'm looking forward to it, for real. We're going to meet somewhere.
For sure.
Yeah, it's going to happen. All of us are going to come together. With Dustin too. We're all going to come together. It's going to happen. We'll manifest it. We'll make choices so that it happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wasn't you there, Martin, in Seattle when I came through?
I was there in Seattle, but so maybe I met you a couple of times, Jerry, because the first time I met you was in Philly at the masculinity summit, like 15 years ago or so. That's when I first met you. Yeah. Okay. A while ago. It was powerful. Yeah. So we've been there in person, and it's going to happen again, and we're going to bring Dustin in too. So thank you both so much. And I want you to both take care of yourselves, be safe and be well. And we will talk again real soon. Wow. I hope you all enjoyed that. I know I say the same thing every time. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. Being a part of it was incredible. And honestly, it was more than even the words that were said, but just the energy that that I felt. And I feel like Jerry and Anwar felt too. The energy and the connection. And that we really are restoring ourselves back to a humanity where we can connect across what seems to be pretty intense lines, like incarcerated people, officers, volunteers, racial differences, gender differences. Obviously gender difference didn't happen on this particular podcast, but these are all the things that we're working to show that we are all connected, and the restoration, the restoring back to human solidarity. And in order to restore back to human solidarity, we have to restore to self-solidarity. So we're going to continue this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I really enjoyed it, so much so that I asked you that question twice, or said the same thing twice. I don't care. I'm excited. I hope you're as excited as I am, and that you enjoyed it as much as I did, because you are on this journey with us. So please, because you are on this journey with us and you like what we do, help us grow. Share this, like, subscribe. Make sure that more and more people are listening to what we're offering on Soul Focused Radio. We ask, as always, that you stay well, you stay safe, and most of all, please stay soul focused.